As you can see, these questions were asked by postdoctoral students. That's why they are very difficult. I don't know where we start. The Soviet Union, I'm starting with the last. During the Second World War, the Soviet Union lost at least 20 million people, 25 million people during that war, maybe 30 million. As you can see, this was an enormous sacrifice in the struggle to defeat Nazism. Of all of the countries that were involved in that war, the Soviet Union is the one that lost the greatest number of people. Therefore, there is a great sensitivity. The Soviet Union is no more, but talk now about the Russian Federation. A very great sensitivity about issues of war and peace. Because I'm saying of the sacrifices that the country made during the Second World War. Winston Churchill raised this thing. It was strange that it was him. But as they were building the EU, what became the EU, Churchill raised this matter and said, you Europeans who are working on what, as I say, became the European Union, be mindful of the fact that the security of the Soviet Union is very important because of the losses they suffered during the war. Now, I'm mentioning that because when at some point, as the Soviet Union was about to collapse, issue of the normalization of the relations between when Gorbachev was still at the head of government state in the Soviet Union, in its discussions with the West, with Reagan and others, question of relaxation of tensions between these two camps and so on arose. And in the end, one of the decisions that was taken was that there would be a unification of Germany, the two Germanys. And the commitment that was then made by the Western countries that the West Germany would remain part of, Germany would remain part of NATO, but NATO troops would not go anywhere east. So that even if the East Germany becomes part of Germany, you would not have NATO troops there. It relates to the matter about the sensitivity about the security question of the then Soviet Union. But in the end, that agreement between the East and West about the NATO borders not going anywhere further east, that matter changed. So that in the end, the question then arose. Even 2008, there was some NATO conference where a resolution was taken to say that even a country like Ukraine and Georgia, which shared borders with the Russian Federation, were perfectly at liberty to join NATO. Putin raised, there you would remember the Munich Security Conference takes place in Munich on security. Putin raised this matter in 2007 to say that the security of the Russian Federation was very important, and countries of the East and West must handle this matter, bearing in mind that there are security concerns of that kind. To cut a long story short, when the conflict that you referred to, you talk about 2022, it's around this question, where the Russian Federation are saying they would never ever agree that you would have NATO troops in Ukraine on their border. Because I'm saying of this preoccupation with this matter of security. The Russians, the Soviet, the Russian Federation offered all sorts of solutions to NATO, to the U.S., about how this matter could be handled. But there was an insistence on the NATO side that the Ukraine had every right to apply for membership of NATO. So you then end up with a situation where NATO troops would sit on the border of the Russian Federation. That's what caused the war. But that war had started not in 2022. It started in 2014, when the then the democratically elected president of Ukraine was removed virtually by coup d'etat. You would remember the way the Western countries welcomed that change. That then the conflict broke out with the eastern provinces, what is the Donbass now, of Ukraine, refusing to accept that coup d'etat, that change of government. So the war started then. You would have seen the statements made by Angela Merkel and Francois Hollande 2 years back, where they said that, you remember there was negotiations at Minsk to resolve the conflict that was taking place in eastern Ukraine. And the Minsk agreement was agreed. Both Angela Merkel and Hollande said that actually that was, they did that in order to buy space for the government of Ukraine to arm itself. They're not genuine about that agreement. So in 2014, the NATO countries then pay attention to this matter of building up the military capacity of Ukraine. So in the eyes of the Russians, the reason you are building up the military capacity of Ukraine is to make sure that indeed you can then impose this thing about the membership of NATO with a strong military Ukraine that can defend itself. So in the end, the Russian Federation felt that if the only way to stop that process, which would lead to Ukraine becoming a member of NATO and the placement of NATO troops on the border of Russia, was indeed to start the military operation in 2022. That is why around this whole discussion of this matter, this issue about multipolarity has arisen very sharply. Because it is about this issue. There's a matter that's not discussed very often here with regard to this issue. It is what is called in the U.S. the Wolfowitz Doctrine. Paul Wolfowitz, a Republican, at some point he made a proposal. It was after the collapse of the Soviet Union, that the U.S. should never allow that any country in the world should be so influential that it threatens any interest of the U.S. And the paper leaked that proposal, and it was attacked even by the New York Times. This is too imperialist and all that. But that concept has never left U.S. national security policy. So that is why you would find a lot of people in the United States will say the war in Ukraine was in fact a U.S. war against Russia, using the Ukrainians. The purpose was to defeat the Russians, so that it's like they want to defeat the Chinese, to make sure there's no power in the world, as Wolfowitz said, who would challenge the interests of the U.S. I'm saying that is why you find the discussion about multipolarity. Now, our country takes a position that it is non-aligned. It's correct. It's a correct position. It's not aligned with Ukraine. It's not aligned with Russia on this matter. And they are saying that to be a peaceful resolution of this issue. And that resolution cannot avoid discussing this matter about a multipolar world. Because it lies at the heart of the conflict in Ukraine. The Russians would never, ever agree that Ukraine should become a member of NATO. I am saying, bear in mind, these are people who lost 25, 30 million people during the Second World War. And I don't imagine NATO will want to change its position to say anybody who wants to apply for joint membership of NATO, they are free to do so. So in the end, I'm saying this conflict, in my view, is that this war in Ukraine can only be resolved, ended, in the context of a discussion about this multipolar issue. The positions taken by the South African government about non-alignment between the two belligerents is fine. It's correct. But in the end, the solution has got to be between the true belligerents. Yeah. I hope that answers your question.
But you see, for Peter Obi to become the next president of Nigeria, the first thing that must be done is a solid structure. A solid one. I'll leave a link in the description in case you want to join to create the Abundance Party of Nigeria.